Welcome to 73 Mentors. I'm your co-host, Jason Vidaurri,
And I'm your other co-host, Vincent Vidaurri.
and we are spending time studying the 73 most influential people who have ever lived. Today, we're still on our number 20, Karl Marx, and we're doing the countdown. For those of you that have been following us, this is our it's our sixth discussion on Karl Marx, and today we're going to be jumping into the Communist Manifesto document itself. And we've got a lot of the ideas behind that through our previous 5 discussions, but we're going to look at this document itself, and the reality is it's one of the most influential documents that there have been in circulation. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what's in there. We're going to talk about why has it been so influential and what's contained therein. So with that, Vince, why don't you get us kicked off?
Yeah, I just thought we'd start with a story. This is, if anyone's been following the news on individuals entering the presidential nomination in the United States in 2020. This past week, Howard Schultz is a former CEO of Starbucks, who's going to weigh in. Well, he's considering being an independent presidential run, or having an independent presidential run. He's bringing in former senior Republican campaign aide onto his team, and according to some sources familiar with the plan, his name is Brandon Del Toro's joining the team, and they put out some information that this is only cautionary. He's still considering running as an independent against President Trump in 2020. But since the announcement, this was an announcement made on 60 Minutes a week ago on Sunday. And it's interesting is that I thought we'd start with this because Howard Schultz is a multi-billionaire. And when you're looking at Marx, you're looking at Marxism, you're looking at the Communist Manifesto, it's fascinating that he hits on the whole system itself is rigged, not just the bourgeoisie, which is basically the people who have capital, but even the system behind that. And I just found that so contrasting or so obvious when a multi-billionaire, just like Donald Trump, runs for president. It makes you pause a little bit thinking, what does this country come to when we have multi-billionaires running for president? What could they possibly gain? And if you're playing a pure Marxist, the whole system's rigged. It's another attempt for those in power to stay in power. And how do you do that? You put those who are the most powerful in power, convincing others, because to some extent, Howard Schultz has a following with Starbucks. I mean, people recognize him, recognize what environmental good he's done, what he's done for the public in general as far as bringing coffee to the masses. So I think there's this perception that he would be at least somewhat qualified, or if not, at least a good public figure for the presidency. But I just find it interesting hearing about his announcement and then contrasting that to what we're going to be getting into about the manifesto, and basically some of the language in the manifesto basically saying in a sense, the whole system is rigged in order to think in a capitalistic system, those who are the laborers, the everyday workers, have bought into the idea that this is the only system there is. And those who are in power, who have capital, who have private property, basically run the system. And I just thought that's interesting, again, contrasting with the manifesto about Howard Schultz entering the presidential nomination. Again, another multi-billionaire. I think his net worth is somewhere in the neighborhood of about $3.4 billion. So that's where I thought we'd start.
Now, it is interesting that really, these are the last two with Trump and him. That's I think the first billionaires going for presidency. Is that it's not a common thing. We have some millionaires out there,
right?
Before and previously, but not billionaires,
right? Yeah, I think there's less than maybe 200 billionaires in the world. I want to say 230, somewhere around there. Less than 300. We'll say less than 300 billionaires. So to think that 2 of them are potentially going to be candidates for the presidents in 2020 is odd.
Well, maybe they just want to do good for the people, Vince. I mean, that's They're out there looking at all the people. They said, hey, we have it so well. I just want to distribute that, share that out, make things better for the people.
I mean, I guess you can make that argument. I think it's untenable. Again, it depends what view you're coming from. If you're coming from a Marxist, is this another piece of evidence of the oppressors trying to keep the oppressed in line? And how do you do that? By continuing not only the system, but by continuing to have every aspect of the system reinforcing the importance of the capitalistic system. So, I mean, I think you can see it that way too.
Yeah. Yeah. Most of the time we're looking at our own interests and trying to, it's pretty hard in the human condition, I don't see very many of us who have gotten a lot of power and authority just willingly relinquish that.
Right.
I'll do quite the opposite. Usually we try to build up other systems and protections so that we maintain that. So.
And I did watch an interview by him, and it's interesting that he's probably going to, he's definitely a Democratic, or I'll say leaning left. I'm not sure if Democratic's the right word. He leans left. And so it's interesting, you talk to, when he's giving his interview, he would be considered socially liberal, but economically conservative. So, which if you're looking at historically, what would that mean is that he would be a centrist or a moderate, which is interesting because as we're going to go through the manifesto, you're going to see that I think the Democratic Party or the left is leaning more left, more socialist, more communist than it has recently. And so for having a centrist or moderate in Howard Schultz, it's interesting because he says, the left has went too far left, and that's why I want to enter the race, or why I'm considering entering the race. And I don't think it doesn't sound like he has any problem with what they do socially. It's what they're doing economically. And this was shortly after some of the Democrats were saying tax the rich. Well, that includes him. So I think there's, as you say, the interest is that he doesn't want to see some of his overall wealth go away because of government policies.
All right. Well, let's jump back into the manifesto. I didn't quite mention it. So the Communist Manifesto came out in 1848. And if you recall from our previous discussions, this was right in the height of a lot of movement there in Europe. When, and I should say it was written by Karl Marx and Engels as well. So it wasn't just Karl Marx, but there was a combination. But it came out right when we had revolutions erupting in France at the time, and a lot of, I guess I see it as a lot of commotion, political commotion at the time, and it seemed to try to ride that wave or maybe expand that wave that was going on there in Europe. And maybe we start out with this way, Vince. Just kind of off the top, what's your maybe a top takeaway from the manifesto? What is it? What does it contain? What does it say? If you can sum it up, and then we'll go back into details as we dive a little deeper.
Yeah, a couple of summations. One is that it was a document, a pamphlet actually, that was put together in order to coalesce the workers, the laborers, and what he would be considered the proletariats. Because at this time in history, you had the Industrial Revolution gaining a lot of steam. So I think he attempts to correct some of the ideas out there about what communism and communists are. And this is a pamphlet that does that in a very succinct manner. He's saying, this is what we believe. You've heard that this is what we do and this is what we do, but you haven't heard why we advocate for certain positions. So he's advocating for certain positions. But overall, the base of the position is that the laborers must come together, and he was hoping this pamphlet would help them come together as a multinational or international group of laborers in order to overthrow the bourgeoisie, which are those individuals who are in capital or that are in that run the industry. So that's what he was hoping. That's kind of the bedrock of the whole manifesto.
Yeah, and I guess and I see he illustrates to some degree some of the pros of capitalism, but also all the negatives of it. And if I could sum it up, basically it's capitalism really bad. It's really bad.
Yeah.
And like you said, the outcome that should happen it even says it in certain strong language that will happen is that eventually the proletariat will overthrow, and we'll move on to the next evolution of socioeconomic evolution, if you want to use that term to say, hey, this is the next better thing,
Right?
or
Yep.
maybe the ultimate better thing might be the right phrasing for where he ultimately sees it going.
Yeah, I don't think he has at least in the manifesto, he doesn't have another endpoint. This is the endpoint. Communism is the endpoint.
Yeah. Okay. So why don't we go back a little bit here and we'll start hitting some of the basic tenets and dig it out a little bit more and see where we get, Vince.
Okay, sure. I think one of the things that we should mention as we go through is that there's some parts of the manifesto that are very elegant, I will say, elegant in their words, elegant in his arguments, and even the opening is just, I think, probably one of the best openings I've ever read of anything. It's excellent. He opens this way. He says, quote, "A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. All the powers of the old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this specter, Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Godset, French radicals and German police spies." I mean, just to open that up, that's the first sentence actually of the Communist Manifesto. And his language, his use of his language and the use of the argument is fantastic. Pretty much throughout. I mean, there's certain parts that aren't as good, but a lot of it is.
Yeah.
I think we should also acknowledge that Frederick Engels helped him write this in English. So I think oftentimes we attribute it a lot to Karl Marx, but you have to keep in mind that Frederick Engels helped him write this.
Yeah. No, I would just second that. There's I guess I would frame it beautiful, just that powerful language throughout the whole document where, I mean, this one throws the image of a specter haunting Europe, the specter of communism. And I see him do that in quite a few different places where he's given this nice imagery for a person to be able to make sense of the world around them, to be able to see the enemy clearly. Oh, this is the enemy. Here's the solution. And then he uses nice imagery in the language to really bring that out. And we'll hit some of that as we go through that. But yeah.
Yeah. Let me just give one other one. So just a little shortly thereafter, he says this: "The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle. Free man and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guild master and journeyman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed, stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on in an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight, a fight that each time ended either in the revolutionary reconstitution of a society at large or the common ruin of the contending classes." So it's at the time too, I think we have to keep this in mind. We're in the middle of the 19th century, so you could pick up some rhetoric here. The use of language, the repetition, in this case, the repetition of opposition, oppressed, of fight, now hidden, now open fight, a fight. So he's using rhetoric in what would classically be in order to persuade people to that argument. And I think that's what makes it beautiful. I mean, we don't hear language like this very often anymore, not even in debates. But he's using this for, a purpose, and his purpose is to convince you that communism is something that people should adopt. And especially and he's using it to enlighten, in a sense, the workers of what's going on in the system. This is your plight. Why are you working in a factory? I'm going to tell you why you're working in your factory. So again, I think, as you mentioned, the language is beautiful. I think it's beautiful because he uses a lot of rhetoric and arguments, and he's very vivid in his description and gives some analogies too. Again, it's a very lively language.
Mm-hmm. And he comes very certain on things too.
Yeah.
Almost prophetic, feeling like this will happen. this it is.
Yeah, I agree. Well, why don't we go? There's basically 10 tenets, if you will, within communism, and we can stop at each one. Why don't we just stop at each one a little bit, and we'll just talk about it. So this is from Communist Manifesto. Again, it says, quote, nevertheless, in most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally applicable. Number one, abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. So this is basically getting rid of all private property. So that's one of the first and main tenets of communism, is to get rid of private property. And there's certain aspects in here where the reason he says this is that, again, he's making people aware of where communism stands, but at the same time he's defending it. Is that then people get upset, oh, you're going to take away all private property. He's like, wait a minute. At least at that time, and to some extent during our time, there's a small minority of people who own property. And especially even now in America, I looked it up, there's less than 30% actually own the household they live in. So again, the vast majority of people don't own their property. So you're saying, wait a minute, I'm not taking property away from anyone outside the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie already own their property. So all we are really doing is we're taking the property from those who own the property, which are the bourgeoisie. So that's number one. Mm-hmm. Any comments on that one, Jason?
Not much. I hit that a few parts, and at first it sounded like he's talking about what you're talking about. Take it from the bourgeoisie, but in the other part he says, I guess a sentence right here that came up. In this sense, this is from the manifesto itself, says, in this sense, the theory of communists may be summed up in one single sentence: abolition of private property. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, so he's saying, that's part of it. Yep. And no further comments on it right now. We'll go through this and then come back.
All right. So number two is a heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax, and we have that in America. I think there's some of the candidates who are running for 2020. You see, I mean, we've always had a progressive tax. It's been more aggressive than others. Mm-hmm. So there was one time I believe that it was up to 90%. The highest tax bracket was 90%. But I think we're gaining momentum as far as a higher tax burden for those who are what would be considered wealthy, which anything above probably $400,000, it's sounding more like. So the top 1%, so kind of give everyone an idea. The top 1% is basically in the United States is anyone earning over $400,000. I think that gets a little misconstrued in the media because they say, well, those people making $10 million or more a year. Well, in actuality, I want to say the number of people making $10 million or more a year is under 300 people. So they're not talking about those people. They're talking about, and the interesting thing about those people that are making over $10 million, a disproportionate number are athletes, people in the media, and people in entertainment. So I don't know. Some of them are business owners, obviously, too, but I think you have athletes, too, and you have a certain number of entertainers. But again, I think it's an easy number to throw out there, $10 million or more, but that's really not the top 1%. Top 1% is about a little over $400,000 a year. So
yeah, that's a hard. I mean, you hear that, it's like, well, 400. That's making good money, but it's not like we don't generally think it's someone like 400,000 that they're these super rich people
right
on these private yachts, just living up the highest life they could. And it's like, well, no, that probably sounds like they're kind of working along the way. So a little distortion in that, it feels like sometimes.
Right. Yep. All right. So that's the second one. So we have the first one is getting rid of private properties. First one, private property. Second one, heavy tax. The third one is abolition of all rights of inheritance. So no longer being able to pass on land to land or any wealth from one person to the next is basically getting rid of all of that. And I'm not sure much to say about that one.
Yeah.
Number four, confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. So I don't know if this one would go very well.
Yeah.
But so confiscating all anyone who doesn't agree with the political system as it is. All right.
Yeah, who gets to decide who's the rebel anyway on this?
If you're not with the Communist Party, you're a rebel, probably.
Okay.
Number 5 would be centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. So this would be very similar to the Chinese state bank. So there would be no First National Bank, there would be no U.S. bank, there would be no bank outside of the United States Bank. So again, putting all the power to, I mean, he's advocating for a monopoly in this case.
Yeah. Yeah, these two here, they're really centralizing all the power.
Yeah.
So you have the conversation of property, and then you have the actual currency all getting controlled by the state. So let's see that continue here.
So that continues here in the centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. So it would control all the controls all the state highways, but all means of transportation and all means of communication. So no more freedom of press. That doesn't exist. And no more moving as freely as you want to because they own the transportation. You'd have to go through some kind of state transportation. And again, if it's organized by the state, then they could tell you whether or not you can travel or not. So that's centralized. And then we get into actual factories. So number 7 is the extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands and the improvement of soil, generally in accordance with a common plan. So not only production factories, but also agricultural. So now we have the state would be controlling the banks, the property, means of communication, means of transportation, all production of both non-edible and edible goods. So that's number 7. Number 8, equal liability of all to work, establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. So in a sense, the state would then decide that large groups of people would be dedicated, in this case, to agriculture. Again, we're talking the mid-19th century, so he wasn't aware that, or wasn't anticipating as much agricultural progress as we've made, so maybe not as great as we needed. I mean, we don't need as many people now just because we have machines, but again, dedicating large number of people to the production of food. That's number 8. Number 9, combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of all the distinction between town and country by more equitable distribution of populace over the country. All right, so now we have controls of all the production, but we also have control of, the state controls also where you're going to live. So more even distribution, no more concentrations in particular cities or locations of that particular country. It'd be more equally distributed.
Yeah, one thing I remember reading that one and thinking, it almost feels, I get this feeling from him in terms of almost like going back to the old ways, right? The old ways were better. This feeling of nostalgia for the good old days, and let's get out of all these cities because they're too populous, and let's get back to the country. And just to say I think that's a common thing we go through as humans. It's fairly natural for us, and we always look back to the previous times and say, oh, that was a better life. That's a better way of life. I imagine the first farmers thought that too. Oh, the hunter and gatherers, the good old days when we're just hunters and gatherers. Now I'm stuck in this farm, working in this little town. Anyway, that's one of the impressions I got from that one.
I think that's pretty accurate. All right, the last one, free education for all children in public schools, abolition of children's factory labor in its present form, combination of education with industrial production. So, to some degree, most civilized states have adopted this. So there's, at least in lower grades, and some in post-education have also adopted this, free education for all children.
Yeah.
And there's no children, or very few, I don't know of any civilized country that has, or developed country that has children working in factories or forced to work in factories.
Mm-hmm.
So we've adopted one or part of 1 of 10. But I think
there's some of that in a lot of things we've done, I think.
Yeah, well, we have a progressive tax,
Mm-hmm.
and well, I mean, centralized credit. We didn't do that outside of recently in the banking crisis of 2008. The U.S. government has had a lot more influence on how banking is conducted than they did before. Transportation, not so much. I mean, communication, we have the FCA or FFC or whatever that controls what we can say.
FCC, yeah, FCC.
FCC. Production, not so much. So we've adopted some of these, not all of them. And I guess the interesting thing about these for me, Jason, is that you often hear, we're moving to a more socialistic, or we're moving to a communist society, or that's a communist society. But there's really not, if you look at all 10 of these, and these are the 10 main tenets, there's not been a country that has adopted all 10 of them. They've been bits and pieces, maybe more than others. I think you could probably point to Soviet Union adopting a lot of these, but not all of these. And same thing with China, adopted some of these, but not all of these.
Yeah.
So again, it's interesting to look at what Marx was actually saying. This is communism, and how over time, whether you're talking about Western countries or not, how they've only taken pieces and parts of these.
No, that's good. Yeah. Let me go on to get into another piece of the document here. Talking about, and we had some of these ideas in our previous discussion. So this is a little bit of going that over. We want to make sure we bring out some of the main points here in the Communist Manifesto. And this says, the modern bourgeois society that has sprouted from the ruins of feudal society has not done away with class antagonism. It has but established new classes, new conditions of oppression, new forms of struggle in place of old ones. Again, it really a major theme, or I guess in Marx himself, but definitely in the document, is that there's still these it's been a history of class struggles, and the capital society, the bourgeoisie with the proletariat, it's just another class struggle. Continue on, different form, but still a struggle. So some of this was, I asked myself some questions on this, and what is class antagonism, as he states out here? Or maybe another way better to say, where does this oppression come from then? Is it just simply because there's two classes, or there's multiple classes, hence you have oppression? So maybe let's dive down into this maybe a little more deeper and say, what is that? What is he talking about specifically within that?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I can tell, it's just, you have the people who run the factories, own the capital. Those are considered your bourgeoisie. You could also put into that, and I think he does, is the governments who support that. People in power, people who have authority, those are your bourgeoisie. And the proletariats are your everyday laborers. And, I think in modern day age, well, we would say, well, how about, we do have those classes, but how about the middle? And he's like, well, the middle really doesn't, the middle only tries to protect what it has. So it'll go around with each one. So sometimes it goes with the proletariat, if it's sensing that the authoritarian figure, the oppressor is getting too much power. But if the oppressor gives them a little bit more power, then the middle class will go with them. So I think in our time is a little bit more, at least it feels a little bit more based off of what I read. There's more gradation between. He said there's the petite bourgeoisie, which are the little owners, the little shop owners. So they don't enslave or they don't oppress that many people, but they still do. And he says, well, they're just trying to protect their own property, what they're doing, their own craft they're trying to protect. So they're not really part of the proletariat. And so again, the proletariat by definition is just your everyday worker. That's what he does. He goes to the factory, puts in his time, and leaves. And the only thing he receives, he gets compensation, but not compensation in order to bring him up out of a proletariat, but just enough to survive and procreate. Is that Marx's point of view?
Yeah. This part I was asking, I was playing with that thought in that, can you have this owner class and the working class, but not have the oppression? Say the owner class is, we can imagine this, a super good group of people, and then they're just there trying to help the workers get the best lives they can. Would Marx still see that as it's not in that, it's in the system itself?
Yeah, I would say Marx would say it's in the system itself.
Yeah. I think I agree too. I was just wondering what you thought on that, because it's like, yeah, it seems like it doesn't matter. The system itself is the rigged system. It's the rigged game, and you can't. I mean, he even advocates. Like I say, you can't make it better. You can't tweak it enough that it becomes good.
No. I think that's that's this whole point. Is you can't alter it enough to be good. You just have to destroy it. It has to be eliminated.
Okay. And
so you want to talk about who the bourgeoisie is? We've kind of defined it, but I think you can go a little bit more.
Yeah, let me read this. It says the bourgeoisie has stripped its halo, every occupation hitherto honored and looked upon to with reverent awe. It has converted the physician, the lawyer, the priest, the poet, the man of science, into paid wage laborers. And this is kind of the effect of having the capitalistic system, and that basically it turns all these, which I guess I view as these noble craftsmen and this noble work that you could be doing, and it all corrupts it into where it's just to earn wages. We become slaves of wage labor. So I start selling my time for money, and we lose the beauty of the craftsman, the beauty of these, I guess the inherent beauty of creating wealth or creating something of value.
Yeah.
And yeah, some of that I see that. It's like, yeah, I can see that we get over fascinated with gain monetarily within capitalism, because that's the focus. It's always the focus.
Yeah.
It's always more.
Well, I'll jump to the proletarians, and then we can come back to the idea of globalization. But
okay.
The proletarians, so just to give you a contrast, this is the proletarians. The proletarians quote, "These laborers who must sell themselves piecemeal are a commodity, like every other article of commerce, and are consequently exposed to all the vicissitudes of competition, to all the fluctuations of the market." So whether you're a physician, whether you're a doctor, a physician, a priest, a worker in a factory, you're basically a commodity. You're just no different than, to use a widget. And you're exposed to all the vicissitudes of the competition. So if you're not a good enough physician or worker, someone else will be better than you, and then therefore you'll lose your job or lose your position or not be seen as valuable. In a capitalistic system, according to Marx, your only value as a person is what is your production. Your value is tied up in your production. Your acknowledgement is all tied up in production. So if you can't produce like you did when you were 20 and now you're 60, your value in the market is less. And you're competing in the open market, in a sense, or the market fluctuations to that. And to some degree, we see that. I mean, we see people who are no longer seen as valuable, and it has to do more with production and economic value than it does, something inherently intrinsic human value. There's no such thing in according to Marx in a capitalistic society.
Yeah, I see that. I see that as well. I guess one of my thoughts, I looking at spend this time with Marx, and it seems to look at life or society or even history through this one lens. And I mean, is there he doesn't seem to address other aspects of life besides and I guess to his credit, he said, because this is the central part of life, this adding value, this work that we do. I guess my question was like, isn't there not other ways to have value outside of that, the working social economic system, where we can just use labor and sell our labor for money, but then we have other things too that add value to life. Maybe, I don't know if he addresses that very much or says much about that.
Yeah, I get the sense no. I mean, that's his criticism of capitalism. It reduces you to production. It reduces you to your work. It equates to your value.
Yeah. Well, let me go back to, is there anything I want to say more about the proletariat?
Did you want to do that next quote? Or
let me get this one as well. Yeah, it says, of all the classes that stand face to face with the bourgeoisie today, the proletariat alone is a really revolutionary class. And it looks back to this foundational idea that, and also, after this document went out, and I think some of his ideas evolved around this area, because this idea says, hey, the proletariat need to rise up, be the revolutionary class. And I think through time, he did see that the lack of ability for the proletariat, for the normal everyday worker to organize themselves to be able to rise up and take on this revolution. And so you get to this point where, maybe it was always part of his thought, but this, and I guess this is my critique, Vince, and I'll push this out and see where we go with it. But that's see, because in multiple ways, I'm in a lot of agreement with Marx is saying, this idea of not having, I mean, if I go down a little deeper and ask, it's not having other people with power and authority over your life. I mean, that's what's going on here. You have the bourgeoisie dictating the life of the proletariat, and he has no options. He can just sell his time for labor, and that's it. He's stuck. And so I agree with Marx in that sense. The one I have a hard time, we read it a while ago, going through all his points, is you see what he seems to do here is that, so this idea of this concentration of, or have people having power over you, well, he moves it from the production owners to the government itself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you centralize everything with the government. So I'm still like, you haven't done anything yet. You moved all this authority and power over my life from my boss at work to the state itself. I mean, centralized. Now they do all the credit. They make the decisions on the banking, on the property, on. I mean, you get to where you live is now in the hands of the state, because they're going to distribute and make sure we're living in the right places.
Yeah, I think he does that for a couple reasons. One is that, well, who would be in control? It would be the laborers. It would be the proletariat. The everyday worker would then assume those positions in the centralized state. I think,
yeah,
to some degree, he does that because he thinks they will have a more judicious distribution and understanding of what each person is going through at that particular station in life. That's what.
See, that's too hard, because that lasts for a generation, and then you're back to where you were. Now, suddenly the proletariat, they're the rulers. They become the bourgeoisie, or the oppressors, and you just basically flip society. Now you're back where you were. Let me share this, because
go ahead.
Because I come from this place where I see the human as a human, no matter where he's at. Whether he's in a company or a corporation, there's good parts and bad parts, and he can do either in that place of power. But I see it the same way if he's in the state or within the government. They may do good or bad and use that power either way on that side too. So a few jobs back, I was start with a new company, and it was a company making circuit boards, and we have these morning meetings. It was an all hands meeting where, everybody gets gathered together and we talk about the day and what happened yesterday and what's going on for production for that day. And early on, one of the managers raised the issue that, hey, we have a bunch of these circuit boards that failed during the process. And so these circuit boards go through multiple processes to be complete. And these ones had moved pretty far down the line and then had gotten messed up. And these are pretty expensive circuit boards. They're, I think, on the order of like $10,000 a piece. So kind of a big deal. You could feel the tension in the room kind of rise up as people looked at each other. And one of the other managers said their first response was, "Who done it?" Kind of who did it. And there was a pushback to say, well, because my manager spoke and said, no, let's figure out what the problem is. Let's go and correct it. Let's make it better. And I was actually part of that team to go and investigate this because it was in one of my areas. And through the process, working with the operators and stuff, we investigated. And the one day where I was there at the machine that actually was making that part of the process, making that circuit board. And what was going on, basically, in this step, we're removing some of the copper off the circuit board. And we're just removing too much. The machine setting wasn't good. The operator really didn't have the good instruction to know what to look for. And but through a little bit of time there, we worked it out, put new instructions in place, adjusted the machine, and essentially we're able to make a better product there. And we didn't have those failures like we did. Well, fast forward several weeks down the road, and throughout the main processing part of the plant had this concrete trench running right through the middle of the plant. Now, this trench contained a bunch of pipelines from different pieces of equipment. Some of it went to wastewater to handle the waste, but it was all enclosed within different pipes. But you look down in this trench, and the trench was probably about 3 feet deep or so, and there's just this multiple bunch of different pipes going different ways, running from different machine to this different machine. And it really had just been a conglomeration over time as people put more equipment in, took equipment out. And it was a maze. You couldn't tell really what pipe went where. You look down there, you're like, gosh, I can't figure out where this ran to or where is it going. And what happened one weekend is we developed a leak down there from one of the pipes and it started filling up this trench with chemicals. And, we got back and that was a pretty big deal. We had to clean it up and the plant manager gathered us engineers all together. I think there was like 10 engineers at the plant at the time. And got in our office and we're sitting, all circled around, looking at each other. And he came with that same spirit. Hey, let's figure this out. This is no finger pointing here. We got to figure out what the problem is and make the situation better. And so what do you guys think? What are some ideas? And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I was fairly new still, so I wasn't saying much. I'm just thinking, well, this is an ugly problem because it's a problem that's been building up for many, many years. To really fix it, you probably have to shut down the plant, tear out a bunch of that piping in there, redo it all. At least a significant part of it is probably the solution. When the other engineer speaks up and says, well, this is what I think. And the plant manager didn't really like what he said and just start seeing him getting a little bit agitated and said, come on, guys, we need better input. Another engineer speaks up and a little more forcefully this time and said, well, this is a little bit along the lines of this is not our fault. We didn't do this. And the plant manager didn't like that at all. And within a few seconds, the plant manager is standing in front of this other engineer's face, right across from me there, with his finger right in his face, yelling at him about how this engineer had messed up and such. And it really took the air out of the room, and you felt that just that loss of that team together. Because, and I share that basically because we're making good strides and good effort to be that more communal company, that more teamwork driven company where we really try to be collectively working together. And that moment just illustrated me that it's difficult. Well, for one to change culture, it's also difficult because we're human and there's aspects of us that are good and bad. And in that moment, that plant manager had a bad moment, had a bad moment. And it really kind of hurt that culture, at least for that time. And, it's just one of those stories I think about back in terms of trying to create the right culture, right? I mean, it very much ties into what Mark's trying to create, this right culture for people so most people can thrive. So where we can live the good life, going back to Plato. How do we all create, how do we get that? How do we get there? And he has certain ideas, and I see there's a lot of value in some of the things he raises, but there's parts where I'm like, wow, I I don't see how that works. And I think part of that is that human being the good and bad human. Like I said, you concentrate all that power into the state. You still have humans in that system. What are they going to do with that power?
Yeah.
I have to suddenly trust that, hey, they're going to all be very good. The very good, only the good side of those humans are going to come out, and they're going to do things for the benefit of the whole. That's hard for me to believe. We don't see it. We just don't see it.
I guess that's the only counter, or one of the counters would be, that may be true, but is it as exploitive as it currently is? Is what Marx is proposing, is it better than what we currently have? Yeah, there may be some abuses, but are they as egregious as abuses as we currently have? I would probably say Marx would say no. It's not as egregious as someone making $3.4 billion and someone else making less than $13,000 or living from not being able to live on a minimum wage. So again, are there potentially going to be abuses? Sure. But are they going to be as many as there currently are? I think that's debatable.
Well, I would say this. I see, I guess, popular culture, maybe movies, they often depict these companies as being these evil entities out there that are oppressing people. And granted, sometimes they do. But then you have, like, even in Marx, you have, well, I'm going to concentrate the power in the state instead of having all these individuals out there. And I guess it surprised me that people aren't more worried about that. Because you're still concentrating power. Instead of you're letting companies do it, you're going to say, I'm going to put it in the state. And to some degree, I get even more alarmed about putting it in the state. And it's for the simple fact that the state has so much more it can do. I mean, think about it. Think about the most powerful companies out there right now. You got maybe your Walmarts, traditionally, speaking in the U.S., Walmart's, maybe some of the newer ones, Amazon, Facebook. Google. But even all those powerful companies, and as much as they do they have the power to tax me, tax my income? No, they don't. They can't enforce taxes. They collect taxes for the state. That's different. Do they have the power to create laws and rules? Well, as much as they get in bed with the state, they do. And we're kind of talking about some of that. But they on their own, Amazon can't say, hey, Jason, I'm writing a new law you have to live by.
Yeah.
A lot of it comes because the state has the guns, has the military, has the force. It really has the force, and that's where a lot of this comes from. They can imprison. They control the armed forces. They have a big influence on education and how we educate our people. They can regulate even family affairs and relationships. It, to some degree, even coming to the home, right? If the government feels, hey, you're not raising your kids right, or it's an abusive environment, I can come in your home and take your kids away.
Yeah.
See, that's what alarms me about the state. It has all these things, and corporations don't have that power. So I worry about the concentration of power wherever it is. Similar to Marx, I guess. In that way, I'm like, I don't want this power concentrated, because then it's susceptible for abuse and for oppression. So what's the alternative of that? To try to distribute that power to individuals and spread it across people as much as you can. That's a little bit where I come from, and playing with Marxist ideas as we've gone for, what we're now in. About the 12th week of reading and thinking about this.
Yeah, about 12 weeks. Yeah. No, I agree. It's hard. I mean, again, I think, as you mentioned, he brings up some good points that are very palpable. There's evidence for them, and I don't think you can deny some of them.
Mm-hmm.
Whether his ideas are better or not, I think there's some better and some not. So, but it's I mean, even Marx, I don't think, as we read his biography, he's not willing. This isn't a piecemeal idea. This isn't a piecemeal ideology. You either implement it all or you don't implement it all. Don't call it communism unless you do those 10 steps that we talked about before. Otherwise, it's something completely different. And he even mentions this in the manifesto, is that you have these social movements, socialism coming about in France and Germany, and he's calling them, they're fake. They're building a utopia, thinking that at some point you can have the laborers and the bourgeoisie working in harmony. He's like, no, that doesn't work. I can tell you right now. So again, he has good ideas, but it's not, according to Marx, they're not ideas that you can, I want to implement number 1, 3, and 7, and 10. No, you implement them all. Otherwise, don't call it communism, call it something else like socialism. And I think according to Marx too, is that if you do that, the proletariat will never be released, never be free. He will always be enslaved, or she will always be enslaved, because you always create a bourgeoisie. Whether you want to consider it the capitalist, the industrialist, or whatever you want, there will always be a ruling class. So I think that's where he's coming from. Let's move on to the idea of, I'll take this one, Jason, is that the idea of, so keep in mind, this is written in the middle of the 19th century, is that this idea of globalization, and they wouldn't have called it this, but this is what we call it now. This is a quote, "It compels all nations on the pain of extinction to adopt the bourgeois mode of production. It compels them to introduce what it calls civilization into their midst, to become bourgeois themselves. In one word, it creates a world after its own image." And we see that. I mean, we do see it. Again, this is one of those Marxist points that actually rings true, is that who do we consider the culture, the states or the countries that are civilized? Those that are more or less capitalist.
Yeah.
So what do we call other countries? Third world countries. Well, why? Because they don't have a market economy. They're not working in a market economy.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. And what Marx is saying here is, and he goes on in multiple different parts of the manifesto, saying all the countries are in competition with the country. Not only the states and countries are in competition with each other, but the people are in competition with each other. And you have to adopt this unless you want to be extinct as a country and as an individual. And that's what capitalism does.
Okay. So if we could sum it up, Vince, why has this document been so influential? Probably the most influential pamphlet for sure that's been at least in circulation anytime recently.
Yeah. I'll state it. Let me state a couple. I'll say 3 things. So number 1, I think the language that he uses, his argument, if you read the manifesto itself, I think anyone who reads it, I think will appreciate, especially if you're a language buff at all, will appreciate the language used. Number 2, which is very close to number 1, is that it's very accessible. Anyone with, I would say, middle school education or higher could understand what he's saying. Number 3, and probably the most important of all of them, is it gives people a reason for where they are or what position they are in their life. So if you happen to be a laborer, you're working in a factory, if you're reading the manifesto, it rings true. What do? I wake up, I'm clocking in, and I'm a slave. I'm being oppressed by this company. I'm not getting I'm not being paid what I'm worth, is probably what we would say today. We're not being paid what we're worth. We're only being paid enough to survive and to procreate. That's what he's basically saying in the manifesto. And so what is the solution? The solution is to form unions or to form cooperative groups or a collective of laborers in order to overthrow the system. So I think those things ring true. 1, the language is beautiful and very enticing, and he uses a rhetoric in it. And number 2, it's very clear. When he uses that rhetoric, it resonates with people. I know that's number 2. Number 3 is that it does signal to people why they're in the plight that they're currently in. If you're struggling as a minimum wage worker, the reason that I'm a minimum wage worker is because I'm being oppressed. I'm a victim. It makes it, again, I think that makes it compelling. That makes it a really compelling argument. What do you think, Jason?
No, I think you're right on there. And to further state on that, why is that so compelling for humans? Because we talked about this before we started recording. This because for humans, uncertainty is almost unbearable. If we're out floundering, we don't know how I should live my life, even the foundation of my life. And there's just a lot of uncertainty. We want to grab onto something. We want to put some kind of certainty in our lives. And I think this document gives you that.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you feel that uncertainty, or if you feel stuck, it lays it out for you and says, here's why you're stuck. And I think probably furthermore, it gives you some hope. It says, here's a path to the better. Here's the path to the better. You're stuck here. Here's a path to the better. And you're like, oh, okay, I can make sense of my world now.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, to be fair, a lot of it, I think he's spot on a lot of his criticism on capitalism. He's spot on. So it totally resonates with people, like you said. It's like, yeah, he's right. He's right on this point. This point's right. This point's right. This point's right. Oh, this fits what I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I said, that's part of the language. It makes it very accessible. It's not written for academics. So again, I think anyone could pick this up and read it. It's less than 50 pages. So I think that's why it's stuck around. And again, the arguments are very compelling. There's evidence for it. And I think you can make a pretty good argument for just the existence of class struggle. It's just not hard to make that argument. So once you start introducing class struggle, I think Marxism is just right there, if not right there. So did you want to talk about technology, or should we go on to the last component?
Yeah, let me hit this technology thing here before we hit the last component, because I thought this was interesting. I pulled up a graph here, and I'll share it with you, Vincent. For those of you that watching the video, be able to see it. I think for you on the podcast here, basically this graph shows the growth in real household income between 1979 and 2015. Now this comes from the CBO, which is the the budget office. So it shows. So this is adjusted for inflation. This is real buying power, and it breaks up. It has 3 lines on here. It has first for the highest 20% of people, highest 20% of income earners. Then the middle from 20% up to 80%. Those middle, I guess we call the middle class earners, and then for the lower 20%. So those are the 3 lines. And what it shows in the past, 30 years here, 30 plus years from 79 to 2015, is that all 3 groups have grown in real income. And it shows 2 things. It shows before taxes and after taxes. So you can see both of those. And for the top earners, that top 20%, they've increased almost 100% in income over these years. So that's quite a bit, right? They've increased quite a bit. And I'll look at the after-tax one. And then, so how about the lower 20% though? Have they increased income over the last, since 1979? And it shows that they have as well. They've gone up about 80%. Not as much as the highest 20%, but they've gone up as well. And of course, this is relative to where they were, right? So I'm not saying that they're now making 80% of what the top earners, but they're making 80% more than they made back in 79.
Right.
And then the middle class, the middle 5 quartiles, or 43 quartiles, I'm sorry, that middle 60%, they increased almost 50% in that time. And I bring this up because I guess for one, it was, you hear that, hey, the gap's getting bigger between even the middle class and the richest, or the poor and the richest. The gap's getting wider. And this does illustrate that. It says, yeah, that is happening. That's been happening. But it also illustrates, hey, but income actually has risen for everybody. All 3 groups have rose in these past 30 plus years. So maybe I guess this comes in for me. I want to have a clear understanding what's really going on. I guess it's because of this. When we create this, when I look at the world and I see oppressor and oppressed everywhere, you basically create an enemy, right? You're essentially creating an enemy out there and say, this is the reason for the bad things in life, your inequalities, any discriminations. This is the reason, and you almost set that at the feet of someone, say, you're the reason for the tough parts of my life. And I don't know how healthy that is. It feels somewhat unhealthy because it seems like once you're in that mindset, even if that enemy goes away, you seem to find another enemy right away. And you grab onto something else. And I bring this graph up because I never hear anybody talk about that. Hey, yes, the gap is getting wider, but everybody has increased at least 50% on not every single person, obviously. This is general, but that even the middle class has gone up 50%, where the poorest have gone up 80%, and the wealthiest have gone up 100%. It's a more complete story, right? There's more complexity there. There's more to think about, because maybe the better question is, well, what have we done right in helping the middle class and the lower class to increase this much? And can we do more of that? And I don't know what the answer is. That it's more, you tend to, the conversation tends to be more oppressor oppressed. You're bad for being an oppressor, or having the capital means, or having this wealth. That's morally wrong. We got to do something about that. But there may be more in there. It's a more complex picture when you look at more of the data. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I think it is, at least part of the answer is that it gives credence to those. When you look at the graph, it's interesting that during times of technological advances, those graphs start even becoming more disparate. There's a bigger gap. So an example would be in the late 2000s when we had a tech boom.
Mm-hmm.
So you saw a big discrepancy. The gap was huge at that point, and then it kind of came back after the crash. And then you saw the housing bubble. So the house, during that time, you saw this huge economic growth between 2000 and 2008, roughly. And then it comes back closer. And now we see again, we're kind of, the graph is growing again. But I guess it gives credence to the idea that those who are able to take advantage of technology seem to advance quicker than those who aren't.
Yeah.
And I think the thing we have to keep in mind, Jason, too, is that it's not one person. I mean, or it's just, it may not even be the same group of people.
Yeah.
Because those individuals at the top, let's just even say 1% in 1980 may not be the top 1% in 1980 as 1990 or 2000 or 2010. So even though we see this difference in income, it may not be the same people. The same people in the highest quartile are more than likely not always in the highest quartile. They could have dropped down, or you could have people from the middle quartile moving up, or even the lowest quartile moving up. So it's interesting in that regard. And I guess to bring it full circle to a little degree is that Howard Schultz grew up in the projects of Brooklyn, from my understanding. So he says he's a self-made billionaire. So early in his life, he's in that lowest quartile. Now he's in the highest quartile. So again, I guess it just points to some evidence that if you're able to take advantage of the social and economic conditions of the time, you can move up and down, or at least move up. And if you can't take advantage, you may move down as far as income is concerned.
Yeah, and I think something that's also happening with technology is that with the advancements of technology, I think it empowers people more. It so has a potentiality to create a quicker gap or a wider gap between the richest and the poorest. And I'll just give you an example. I mean, if you look back at technologies of 100 years ago, and we've used this one before, Vince, in our discussion about gasoline. Gasoline for a car, for a vehicle, contains about 30,000 calories. The average human burns about 2,000 calories a day. So if you have access to a gallon a day gasoline, you can make a rough assumption, simplification, that you now have the equivalent of an extra 15 people of power every day. So you just magnify your power by 15 times, 15 extra people. But you look at how the technology has moved now. Now you get to say our age now in the last 10, 20 years, and some of the internet technologies. And you can see how much more influence some of those technologies have empowered people. And maybe another way to look at it is like Walmart, from its beginning to being a real powerhouse. You're talking about from the 1950s to maybe 1980s.
Yeah.
somewhere around there, 10, 20, 30 years for them to build up that and to create that gap. Now you jump into our time. Facebook, how long did it take?
Decade, maybe.
Amazon, how long has it taken? It's a lot quicker now. Because of technology, those who figure it out are able to take advantage of it. They can move a lot quicker, right? Because the technology is more powerful. It's just one of the ideas on that. So it's almost asking the question. I mean, we see this difference happening. It's really addressing the question: why is this happening? Because it would help us to know what we do about it. Because I guess in a general sense, I agree that getting too much difference is not good. It's not good for a society to have super, super rich and poor at the same time. I think we all agree on that. It's like, this is not sustainable for one. And there's something we should be doing about that. So a few ideas, a few concepts around that. And because I did look and try to, people have tried to ascertain why this gap's happening. Why has it widened? And there isn't any consensus on it at this point. That people, and most of the time people don't even talk about it really. If you think about it, they just note it and use it as something to then illustrate, well, we need to do something about it. And here's what we should do. It's like, well, wait, maybe we should understand why it's happening. And that'll probably give us a better tool on what we can do about it.
Yeah.
I think that's about what I have to say on technology. I don't know if you have anything else.
Nothing's good.
No.
Let's go back to the.
Okay.
So I thought we'd just end with another potential. There's another candidate. This is Senator Kamala Harris. So this was an interview by, I believe, CNN, this is a town hall meeting. I apologize, town hall meeting. And this is the question she was asked. Question, thank you, Senator Kamala Harris. My question for you tonight is simple. In a society where nearly 1 in 5 children live in poverty, is the existence of multimillionaires morally defensible? Harris's response is this. Well, here's, let's just say this. We have had policies in this country, at least in the last 2 decades, that have disproportionately benefited the top 1% to the exclusion of the working families. We have a situation in our country right now where just recently the administration passed a tax bill that benefits big corporations in the top 1% to the exclusion of the supporting working families, and that is unconscionable. And you are exactly right. We have babies in America today that are on the verge of starving. We have families that cannot pay their bills. In fact, one of my proposals is that we address the inequity around what has been termed what we would be one of the most significant tax cuts for the middle class families in generations. And it is what I propose. I call it the LIFT Act. But what we can do is this. For families who are making less than $100,000 a year, they would receive a $6,000 tax credit that they could receive $500 a month. Understand that we have so many families in America right now that a $500 emergency away from complete financial catastrophe. Let's also understand that we've got to have economic policies in this country that understand that right now it's not working for the working people. Right now in America, in 99% of the counties in America, if you are a minimum wage worker working full time, you cannot afford market rate for a 1-bedroom apartment. That is absolutely unconscionable. And so we've got to correct it. And part of it is that the people at the top 1%, people who are making $100 million a year, who have $500 million a year, they need to pay more taxes. And we got to. And we have to do is correct course, because for too long the rules have been working against the working family and working for the benefit of the top 1%. We have to correct course. So I mean, this goes back to, I mean, I bring this up because it mentions a couple things that Marx are. So the idea of progressive taxes, so those at the highest percent would pay more taxes, and what they're going to do is then use those taxes in order to help those at the lower percent. So, to some degree, that's what Marx was advocating for. And who's going to decide that? This is going to be obviously a government mandate. Who's going to determine who qualifies, who doesn't qualify? Those who qualify will get the tax benefit. Those who don't will not. And identify those individuals who are, again, this is the idea of the top 1% of making $10 million a year, which I've mentioned before, that there's not that many people making $10 million a year or more, or who are making $50 million a year. Now, the number of people making $50 million a year or more in the United States is less than 100 people. So if she thinks she's going to tax, let's just be generous. Let's just say it's not this much, but let's just say there's 500 people making over $10 million a year. Well, I don't know how she's, again, we mentioned this before, is that these people are not taking, it's not as if they have $10 million in their bank account that they're putting in over the course of a year. That's not what they do. People at that strata, I would imagine they're pretty smart about where they put their money and how they do it. So these are potentially bonds that they're not taxable, treasury bonds. There are probably other instruments of investment that they're not being, at least legally, currently is not legally being taxed. But I guess, again, she could do that. She could institute that. But the whole point is that the idea of those who are making more money should be taxed more. And that's, again, a Marxist idea. And it's in order to help those who, as she even puts it to some extent, is being oppressed. They can't even afford their living. So let's just take away from these select few and give it to them. So she mentions that 99% of the counties in America that you can't work a minimum wage and afford standard living, a bedroom. So I don't know. That's where I thought just two presidential candidates that we talk about in kind of contrast to Marxism. What are your thoughts on that?
That's good. I was actually, I think I was reading Marianne Williamson. She's another candidate, not one of the leading candidates, but she's another one. And I was listening to some of her initial talk and stuff, and it was very much similar in this vein, where it's like talking about there's such a discrepancy and we need to tax the rich again. And so it just resonates that you hear that in multiple places. And one of the things that she was saying is that we got to get off of 21st century ideas. Or I'm thinking about 20th century ideas. These old 20th century ideas, we got to get off of those and move on to the new thing. And I couldn't help but think, being in the middle of Marxism, well, how about the 19th century ideas? Are those ideas better than the 20th century ideas? Because, part of it's irrelevant. Like what era the idea came out in is not really relevant if it's a good idea or not, for one. But I just thought it was funny because I'm like, well, but a lot of the things that are being spoken of are come from 150 years ago.
Yeah, that's funny.
But one of the thoughts here, Vincent, that Camila brings up here is this disproportionate rewards. And we brought this up a couple episodes ago. And maybe I'm a little bit tainted by my background. As a kid, I really enjoyed watching all the wildlife shows with my grandpa or my uncles or whoever had to be there. And just got a kick out of seeing nature and animals and how they lived and how they reacted. And maybe that's distorted my view, because sometimes I hear like these inequalities and stuff, and I'm like, I look at these, still have these old images of the wildlife on the savannah, and I'm like, it's a brutal life. It's not. I had a hard day today. It's like, well, that's life and death. But one of these things, the concept is this disproportionate rewards. In other words, just being fractionally better than someone else at something, especially if you're in this top area. I think we brought up LeBron on this in this context. Saying, well, LeBron, he's probably a little bit better than the next best basketball player, but he gets rewarded maybe a lot more, millions of dollars more because of being there. Right. And same with it, you can look at the entrepreneur at that too, saying how much better is Jeff Bezos than the next guy who is trying to create an online retail market. Yeah. Well, maybe just a little bit better, but because that little bit being better became a huge difference. And we kind of look at that and say, well, that's so unjust. That's such a human, reward, I mean, it's because of the greed or for these other reasons. But I was thinking about the animal kingdom and how we see that play out there as well. And I'll give you an example. You have the alpha male, the dominant male. He's probably, maybe he's a fraction of a percent stronger, bigger than the number two.
Yeah.
And what is his reward for being the alpha male? Well, it depending what species you look at, but in some cases he gets the whole herd of females. He doesn't get the 0.2% more than number two does. He gets them all. And I bring this up. You see that in multiple places, multiple species, like I said. But I bring it up just to show that, not to say that it's a good or anything, but to show that it's not necessarily a man-made creation.
No.
That nature plays out some of these things as well. And I mean, we might, our next person we're going to start diving into is Darwin. We may see more of this in evolution. Maybe there's an evolutionary reason, at least in the animal kingdom. I could imagine it why that happens that way.
Yeah.
Why be the alpha male just being a little bit better gets so much more reward.
No, I agree. I mean, because we're studying Marx, we tend to focus on economic disproportion. But you're right. This disproportionate amount of awards is most evident in athletics.
Yeah.
You think about the 100-yard sprinters, 100-meter sprinters. It's a fraction of a fraction. You're looking at less than a second determines who's a gold medalist versus who's not.
Yeah.
I mean, in all actuality, even if you and I run, I mean, it's a difference between 10 seconds and, well, I'll say 25 seconds, but that's only 5 seconds. That's not that big of a discrepancy. But you see, I mean, even in track, basketball, football, you're not that much different. I mean, those athletes aren't that much different each other. I think the most interesting one is baseball. Okay, if you're a hitter, you're hitting 200.
Yeah, that is interesting.
If you're a 200 hitter, you're not in the major leagues for very long. Well, if you're a 300 hitter, that's only 10 more balls per every 100.
Yeah. Now it's funny because you said I hit two out of 10 balls that come to me. Yeah, sorry, I hit 3 balls out of 10 that come to me. Oh, world class, baby.
You're looking at not only longevity, but the amount of money at 300. Or even if you're approaching if you're a 300 hitter, but if you're closing in on a 400 hitter, a 400 hitter, you're a multi-millionaire. And you're only hitting 1 more ball out of 10.
Yeah.
You're hitting 10 more balls out of 100. Not even. You can hit about 7 or 8 more balls out of 100 than a 300 hitter. You're world class. But again, it's the difficulty of it, but you get a disproportionate number of awards. I mean, rewards. Is that okay? A 350 hitter, you're making multi-million dollars. You're a 250 hitter, you're barely hanging on. You're probably in the minor leagues.
Yeah.
So
that's a good point. Things to think about, that's for sure.
That's right.
Cause you to think, there's more. We don't just see this in just human behavior.
But I mean, I guess one practical application of that is this, Jason, is that you and I, if we make small incremental gains, we get disproportionately rewarded from that. I mean, that's what happens. I mean, people who have small incremental gains, the difference between someone having 120 credits in college and someone having 126 is the difference between having a BA and not having a BA.
Yeah.
But the one who has the BA gets disproportionately rewarded.
Yeah.
I mean, he's short an English class and a PE class. And the other person makes at least tens of thousands of dollars more. Yeah. Potentially. So, yeah.
No, it's fair.
Well, that's my thoughts.
Is that your closing thoughts for the day?
That's my closing thought.
Disproportionate rewards are okay. This is how it is.
This is how it is.
I guess I'll just close it. I guess wrapping up the Communist Manifesto and again to emphasize how influential this document has been throughout, since 1848 when it came out, and we talk about some of the reasons that it has been, and I found a lot of value in going through that. And even though we saw a lot of these ideas already by studying Marx over the past several weeks, that I guess the nice thing was to see the writing and the power of the writing along with those ideas and being able to gain some understanding of why it has been such a powerful document. And I'll close with that today.